Greetings and welcome back to another DrumRoll Studios tutorial. It's been a little bit since I've done one of these, so I'm just going to jump pretty much right into it. Alright, so this is the image that I'm going to be working on today, showing you guys how I did it, a lot of the step-by-step process. Not the entire thing because it took several hours and I don't want to make a super long video. So this is the final image. This is one of the 3 images that I took ahead of time. This is me and my brother fooling around, pretending that a Terminator is coming through the doorway and sort of reacting to it and turning away from it. This is a single shot of the 6-inch toy figure Terminator set in the doorway so that the lighting is accurate, so that the lighting is the same for both us and the small toy. And then this is just the last shot of my brother holding up a shoe to be thrown in towards the very end, so it looks like a shoe is flying off of his foot as we're reacting and turning away. Alright, so first things that you want to do, and one of the things I did, if you can see that the picture actually changed the perspective and the framing. I upsized, and you can always adjust it depending on how you want it. I just want to make sure I got a wide enough angle to include most everything in here. Probably would have preferred to have his fingers in there as well, but they just got eliminated from the shot, and it wasn't a big enough deal to me to keep it in. As far as the Terminator itself, obviously he's going to be, he's got a lot of blue around him and he will be standing in the same doorway, but you'd want to eliminate that. So for the composite, for the sake of the composite, you'd want to get your pen tool and start wherever you feel comfortable and just make as precise an outline as possible around. Sometimes I tend to go a little bit wide just because I know I can eliminate it later, and I'd rather have more of the details as far as the item goes. So this is going to be fast forwarded through so you can basically get the end idea without having to sit here watching me do all of this. Alright, and once you've eliminated as much as you can with the pen tool around the subject you want to isolate, you're going to want to create a layer mask down here at the bottom of your layer panel, and make sure the layer is selected so you're not actually editing the image itself. You want to have a brush tool. I usually prefer about midway, 50% hardness and fairly small size. Just normal and the opacity at 100%. You want to go in and paint black on the blue parts or whatever parts of the image that you want to eliminate. So again, it's a fairly time-consuming process depending on what image you're working with. As you can see here, because the Terminator has so many parts missing and able to see kind of through him, I'm going to be working on this for a little while, just making sure that all the little blue parts are eliminated, touch up around his skin, around the or not his skin, the metallic parts. He doesn't have any skin. As I get more and more fine, I will probably go with an even smaller brush, somewhere around 10 pixels, and the hardness probably all the way to 100%, just to make sure that the lines are very crisp around some of the metallic parts that we'll have. You'll be able to see through them fairly distinctly, especially the parts that are really in focus. You want to make sure those are crisp so that they actually sell the whole image, rather than if they're a little bit soft or blurry, it just looks more like a composite, looks more fake, I guess you could say. So after you're done doing all of this, eliminating all the blue, hopefully, if you've done it correctly, could take quite a bit of time. If you ever do get, like say here right around the side of his face, if you ever find that you edit too much in and you cut too far in to eliminate the blue, you can always switch up your color to white and then go back over the exact same spot and it will paint it back in. That way you don't have anything you can't completely correct in case you make a mistake, or if you find out later on, if you save a Photoshop project of it and you find out later on that there's a part that you wish you had touched up a little bit more, you can always go back and do that as long as that layer remains the same. So once you're all finished with that, hopefully you have something similar to this. where all of the sides have been eliminated. There's still a little bit of blue you can tell around the bottom part, and if you'll notice the arm, as far as the way it's edited over here and the way it's cut out, is because, and same with the gun on this on the left side, it's because when you pull the image, the background up, there's a doorway right here, there's a knee that's sort of in the way, and then over here there's a sleeve that's sort of blocking the gun. So I've gone back in and painted very carefully along those lines so that it does have that look of it's actually in the image, it's actually in the picture, rather than if it was in front, it wouldn't make any sense because he's in 3D space. He's actually farther away from the camera lens than we are. And he's stepping in the door, so he has to be sort of slightly behind the doorway. It's just the way the figure himself turned up. Alright, so the next part, and probably one of the ones that people who are looking closely at the picture were trying to figure out, is where the shadow came from the Terminator. So I'm duplicating the layer itself, and then I'm going to select that layer and use the adjustments to bring the brightness all the way down, because I want it to be as dark as possible, and then the contrast all the way up. You can see there's still some silvery parts that are showing through. Sometimes you can go with the curves and help to darken up the rest of it. You just want to get it as black as possible, and there's still going to be some elements that are shining through, and that's fine. So the next thing to do is go to a blur, and I prefer a Gaussian blur, probably around, say around 6 or 7. I'm going to go 7 for this one, why not? And this is the part where you want to distort it, because the shadow wouldn't play distinctly on the wall, you know, in crisp, exact size fashion. It would stretch and it would warp depending on what it's hitting as well. And since the light direction is coming from behind him, at least from the outside, I decided to make the shadow run up along the wall towards the ceiling. So I'm going to go with the layer selected, I'm going to go into Transform and the Warp tool. And I'm going to grab and stretch him up towards the ceiling, keeping his feet as close as possible to being planted, because I'm going to tie the shadows in later. And as you can see, he just gets more and more bent out of shape and distorted. And make sure the head kind of drags along. It's just kind of something you have to play with and figure out what looks good to you, what you think works well, and depending on how long you want the shadow to stretch, you could make it go all the way down to the top left corner of the picture. But I just wanted it to run across the door and towards the ceiling, but to have the top of the head still in frame, still visible. So I decided to leave it a little bit on that blue wall so that it's a little bit more easily identifiable as a shadow, while still keeping it as menacing as possible, still as big as possible. Alright, so that's pretty close to what the other shadow was. I think if I remember right, what I did as well is I went in and I used the Liquify tool. And as soon as it loads up here, alright, using a fairly large brush, around 200. Let's go. So using a fairly large brush around 300, I'm going to grab the head and just push it out a little bit away from the sort of tall cylinder shape that it was getting, so it looks a little bit more like a head, and maybe pull out the shoulders a little bit too. Not a whole lot of touch-up, but just enough. I wanted the head just a slightly different shape than the warp tool was giving me. Alright, so we got a shadow, and you can see obviously it's stretching over my arm and over parts of the doorway I wouldn't normally do. It's over my foot as well. So I'm going to take and make this, bring it down to about 55%. You can use it as an overlay as well. and that'll really help as far as the parts that are over something bright. It'll almost eliminate that. The parts that are darker, you'll still see the shadow, but you can go back in and eliminate that from there. The shadow plays in about the same way as what I wanted on the doorway. And what you can do with that is the layer underneath, which would be, at this point, would be the image with just me and my brother, just the two figures in it. I would go in with a black brush with color burn at about 7%, fairly large brush, very soft brush, and just where that doorway is and the wall, maybe just darken those colors up just a little bit, just to help sell that the shadow is there. It just helps tie it in a little bit more as far as the image goes. Alright, so that looks pretty close to what was there before. If you want to check out what I did, the differences in shadow. So this is the shadow I just did for demonstration, and this is the shadow that was there before. You can see he's a little bit more relaxed looking, I guess. And the bottom, obviously I curved it a little bit more in this example than I did before, because I wanted to be playing behind the figure. And that's a good thing too, is to always turn on and off your figures when you're creating shadows or doing shadows, so you can see how well they line up. And then from on a separate layer, down here in the, oh, there's a shoe. So this layer down here, right underneath the feet, I also went in and separately made its own shadow layer using the same opacity and colors as the shadow that we made off of the Terminator copy. You can see it's just a little bit under the feet, but it helps give that extra feel of shadow. Makes it bind into the picture a little bit more. There's a flying shoe. So for light purposes, I wanted to have a little bit of a glow, sort of like headlights, or maybe even, you know, almost a supernatural type light around the Terminator. So there's this layer that I painted in with the blue brush, and that just, with the Terminator in the picture, it just helps throw in a little bit more of I guess sort of a highlighting. It helps a little bit more with the colors around him. And then I threw in a second layer, just very lightly painted in some blue around the metallic parts to help with a little bit of shine, and around the neck to sort of isolate him from the background, because it was really dark around his head, and I was afraid that some of the details and they would get a little lost. And then another separate layer, I went in and grabbed a red brush and painted in around his eyes to help with a little bit of glow, and then using a very, very wide soft brush at around 30% on normal, I just painted in some red around his eyes. Just clicked very lightly until it became sort of a glowy red. You don't want anything that's really has a hard edge to it, because it doesn't look like light at that point in time. You want to have a soft fade away. And then a smaller brush at the very center of the eye, went back in with white at about 40%, just to help highlight that, because red as itself by a light would not just be bright red, it would actually have a white center. Most lights have a very white center to make it look real. You need to do that. There's another layer here that is simply highlights. I wanted to go back on the Terminator's frame, and with a light blue painted around some of these edges that I wanted a little bit of light to be bouncing off of. So you can see with it on and with it off, there's just a little more detail that pops out. And some of those lines are really fuzzy. I wish I'd actually made them a little bit brighter. But one of the last things I did as far as layers go, I added a green tone by itself. And it's a color dodge layer, so you wouldn't normally be able to see So this layer is simply for color dodging. It's helped brighten up some of the more prominent parts, some of the light parts. And you can see the difference there as far as the Terminator goes. It definitely helps with a greenish tone to him, makes him look a little bit more shiny. And it puts a little bit of green on the carpet and on the characters, but as long as it's not too extreme, you don't want something that's too bright or too vivid if it doesn't match the lighting in the image itself, because it'll just reek of being fake. So yeah, as far as compositing, that's how I did the shadow. Just hand drew in some other elements as far as the shadow trails or colors, or a little bit of touch up here and there as far as the Terminator exoskeleton itself. And using layer masks, you just have to kind of focus on the elements that stand out from the background. If you go really finely into the Terminator, you can still see there are some blue marks on his frame that I left there. Either I didn't see him or I was just moving fast enough trying to get it done. But this is the second attempt that I've taken at doing the Terminator. The first time the video just stalled out and wouldn't record anymore after about 18 minutes. So I redid this in order to illustrate a lot of the elements that I used and how I did certain things without taking 2 or 3 hours to do it. Total, the picture probably took me about 2.5 to 3 hours, I think. And a lot of that was simply matched up. A lot of the reason that was quick is because I matched up the perspective and tried to keep the focus the same. Obviously, when you're shooting with a toy figure, you want your focus, your depth of field to be much wider, because it's something that small. You're bound to get something that's out of focus, and it just makes it look more like a toy. So if you can, try and shoot wide. I think I shot at f/22 for the Terminator, and I think I was at f/9 or f/10 for the wide shot of me and my brother in the doorway. And then putting them all together just takes a lot of practice, takes time. But yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. If there's anything about the picture you want to know how I did specifically that I didn't cover, also ask me or let me know, either on the video or in one of the comments. And yeah, get out there and keep creating.